Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss The Huntsman, Winter's War, starring Chris Hemsworth, Charlize Theron, Jessica Chastain, and Emily Blunt, directed by Cedric Nicholas Troyan. Now, I have seen this before, and what do I think of it? Well, I don't remember too much about it except a few things, but I'm not going to get into full details. The only thing is, I know this is the only movie that never shows Snow White once. And thank God that I don't have to see Kristen Stewart as Snow White again, because last time I said she was a terrible Snow White. But we'll see how the net movie comes next time. But let's get into this movie, The Winter's War, aka The Huntsman. We open with a narration by Liam Neeson about how Snow White vanquished Ravenna, returned by Charlize Theron in Snow White and the Huntsman. As we see it in the Golden Mirror from the last movie, as Ravenna takes another kingdom by taking out its king for death by suffocating him. And Ravenna takes the mirror and she commands it as she becomes invincible, along with her sister Freya, played by Emily Blunt. As she's deeply in love with the man and she plays chess with her Ravenna, as she knows Freya is carrying the man's baby, and she has a baby girl in her as she's killed by her father. And I honestly thought it was Ravenna telling him to do so, as she gets away from Ravenna and raises an army led by children like Eric and Sarah, as Freya becomes the Ice Queen. And I thought Freya's backstory was pretty weak, a pretty weak thing as far as her story is concerned. And the cinematography is just as bad as last time. And the narration by Liam Neeson is unnecessary as far as I'm concerned. And do we need the Huntsman now being named Eric as a boy? Probably. And his wife, whom he was led to believe was dead in the last movie. And when I walked into this movie, I thought, is this a prequel to Snow White and the Huntsman? Or we will learn in a few minutes it's a sequel to that god-awful film, as that's a bad idea to begin with, even without putting Snow White in the movie, as she's never shown, as that's an improvement over the first film, and I'll say kind of. Eric and Sarah become warriors as they'll grow up to be returned by Chris Hemsworth and played by Jessica Chastain, and I get they're madly in love, but I just unfortunately didn't buy it at all. And I do like these actors in other movies, but not this one, as they have no chemistry whatsoever. As Eric tells a little girl who's afraid of Freya to make a mean face like she doesn't scare her, which is a way to scare them off eventually. But I don't know about a leader in general. While Sarah is a badass in this movie, but it's not saying much because I just don't like the character, as none of this is, as far as the story makes any much sense. Eric and Sarah want to marry one another to be free of Freya, as they plan to escape her kingdom, and an owl hears and tells Freya, and she lets the other huntsmen know they're trying to leave as they're in love. And unfortunately, Freya doesn't believe in love, as she believes they fought for her and their love is what makes them weak, and she blocks them with the ice wall. And the special effects are looking really, really bad. And I never give director Cedric Nicholas Troyan to do another fantasy action movie like this ever again, as he's terrible at telling a fantasy story. But he will do action again in a Netflix movie called Kate with Mary Elizabeth Winstead, which I've never seen to this day. And Sarah gets stabbed by one of the huntsmen, and Freya tells the others to get Eric out of sight. And we move on to 7 years later in Snow White's kingdom, and with no Snow White in the movie whatsoever, and we get an extended cutscene where the mirror Ravenna had in the last movie is attacking the guards and gets stolen off screen, while Eric is hunting for deer, but instead hits a man in the leg and beats their asses and steals one of their horses. I'm thinking, is Eric on the run from Snow White? As this kind of bothers me. And do I recommend watching the extended cut? No. But to preview my thoughts, I don't recommend anybody watching this movie whatsoever in general. Eric gets approached by William, returned briefly by Sam Claflin, and asks him to look for the mirror, with Neon returned by Nick Frost and his half-brother Griff. And William tells Eric, says to him Snow White isn't feeling well, as she gets rid of the mirror until someone got a hold of it. Well, an ice owl led by Frida spies on Eric, and it was an owl, and he destroys it. And Eric reluctantly brings along Nyan and Gyrif as his partners, and thank God I get to only deal with a couple of the dwarves, like Nyan and Gyrif, for the rest of the movie. And Eric tells Gyrif the dirt wants him to go back home, but he refuses to, as this character is pretty annoying for most of the movie. And I don't care for William's return from that god awful Snow White and the Huntsman film. Eric, Nyan, and Gyrif get to an area where the mirror has gotten away from the men serving Queen Snow White were killed, and they have to find who did this as well as to get off the road. And they stop at a place where I was getting vibes from the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, as Eric asks if anybody has seen a mirror, while Neon gets rejected by a tall woman. And Gyrif says he told them so until some bad men come in. And Neon happens to open his big mouth while feeling insulted and learns the bad men are also huntsmen and get into a fight with Eric and almost gets his ass beaten until Sarah comes in, all alive, and fighting the bad huntsman. And she's led to believe Eric left her behind before she died. But what happened if you want the beginning of the movie up close? He tries to save her life, and she was killed before he could ever save her from the other huntsman. And he saw it as her side of the story was ridiculous, because I remember what happened in the beginning of the movie, as she envisions it isn't really what happened at all, as she's led to believe he abandoned her, but he was thrown out by Freya. And he's happy to see her when she's not happy to see him, while Gyrif doesn't like her at all. But come on, what does he like? And the acting by Chris Hemsworth and Jessica Chastain was terrible, as they have, like I said, no chemistry whatsoever. Next day, Sarah gets rid of the horses and brings Eric, Nyan, and Gyrif with her to go after this golden mirror, as they stay off the road and they try to talk about their love and marriage until Nyan and Gyrif shows one of the traps and gets captured, as there's another trap by a couple of female dwarves, Bronwyn and Dorina, and Eric tries to negotiate with them as they cut them down, and they have a proposition for them, which is to come with them to get the golden mirror and start their quest together. And I get the impression they're lesbians, as Bronwyn, despite having the hots for Eric, was married. But as the movie progresses, Nyan and Dorina get to know each other, and they canoe as Eric and Sarah learn to respect each other as the movie progresses, and the plot is a mess, as it doesn't make any sense. They go along the way and eventually find the golden mirror being heavily guarded by a monster of some kind that I swear looked like a bear mixed in a blender with an ape. But once again, the special effects look so bad. And when they attack the monster, it looked rather awful. As they get the golden mirror and Sarah sees the necklace was never taken off by Eric, and they almost kiss until most of the creatures come for them in their general direction. And Eric briefly fights them alone until Sarah points a fire arrow at the creatures, saving Eric's life, and Eric joins one of them on the other side. And this action sequence was pretty dumb. Just pretty damn dumb. And when they almost get killed, Eric did feel pretty unrealistic, because I knew he was coming back for the rest of the movie. And they rest and clean themselves up, while Sarah doesn't love Eric back, as she asks him to let her go and almost fights, but they kiss and one another. And this acting of the dialogue is painful to listen to at times, as sometimes I can't stand this movie. As the next day comes and the golden mirror reveals itself, and Eric says to kill for Ravenna, as Sarah wakes up and Eric sees if she's trying to kill him, but she doesn't, as Freya shows up with her army, and the dwarves believe Sarah betrayed them, as well as Eric, when she shoots an arrow at the necklace that was for their love, as they're led to believe they killed them, while Neon and Dorina turn into ice. And I just don't care anymore, as I want to get to the new movie at this point. Eric wakes up and he remembers what she said to him earlier in the film, which is she never misses a shot, as she said that after saving Eric's life to save him from the monsters. While Freya takes Sarah back to her kingdom, while tiny goblins ride on some deer to go after Freya to come and get Sarah and defeat Freya once and for all, as Freya gets the golden mirror and asks Mirror, Mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all, and Ravenna comes back from the dead. I can't believe they brought that back Charlize Theron, who was the villain last time, and she's going to be worse here than last time, as far as the character is concerned. Despite Charlize Theron is a pretty good actress, I just despise this character she plays in this as well as in Snow White and the Huntsman. While Eric plans on jumping on top of the building to a place where he can land himself, while Gyrif and Bromwyn sneak around and Ravenna gives a better orders to the Huntsman in Freya's kingdom, as she doesn't believe it's Freya's kingdom, as Ravenna takes over the throne, and that's not a good sister thing to do. And remind me, why are we going back to Ravenna? I do not know, and honestly, I do not care, as I'm almost checked out of this movie like I did last time. Eric encounters a girl whom he told to make a mean face earlier in the movie as an adult named Pippa? I don't know if I said the name right, please forgive me. And she lets him go to stop Ravenna and Freya from invading Snow White's kingdom, as Freya says she's the queen, and Eric almost kills Freya until Ravenna shows them she's alive, while Sarah wants to attack Freya because Sarah is in love with Eric. And they get taken prisoner and being called traitors, as Eric tells the other huntsmen to fight for themselves and not for Freya and Ravenna. And Ravenna looks at Sarah and says Ravenna has been dead before to Eric, and they do show their love for one another. And at this point, I'm a little bit checked out of the movie, as it's so bad. The other huntsman saves Eric and Sarah's lives and fights Ravenna with them, as Freya doesn't want her huntsman killed by her evil sister Ravenna. And she makes an ice mirror to block Ravenna from killing them, as Freya asks Ravenna what did she do, and she asks for the truth, and she became evil after she plotted to make her Freya's lover to kill Freya's baby girl, which felt so damn obvious from the beginning of this frickin' movie. And Ravenna takes a stab at Freya, and the huntsman breaks the mirror to fight Ravenna, and she kills a couple of more while Freya blocks Ravenna from doing so. And eventually Freya hugs Ravenna, and Ravenna stabs Freya and says how sorry she is for killing Freya's daughter, as love was never meant to hurt for her. And come on, that's no excuse. As Eric gets back home and fights Ravenna to the death, and Freya helps out by freezing the mirror, and the mirror not only breaks down, but Ravenna does and dies, and that death for the villain felt rather too silly for me. While Freya sees herself with her daughter because she knows that's never going to happen, and sees how the love of Eric and Sarah and says to them how lucky they are, and suddenly dies and it unfreezes everybody, including Neon and Dorina, and everyone is reunited with their loved ones. Great. As children are free from the curse of the Ice Queen. Great. And Neon kisses Dorina, and Bromwyn kisses Griff, which I guess was earned after fighting together. And we get the Liam Neeson narration, and the climax was so bad. But not as bad as Snow White and the Huntsman. But how much of an improvement was this compared to that pile of garbage? Let's talk about it in a rating. I'll give this movie a 2.0 out of 10. Sort of an improvement over Snow White and the Huntsman, but unfortunately it's not saying much, as these characters are still unlikable, as Freya's backstory was pretty weak storytelling. And did we need Liam Neeson narration? 25% yes and 75% no, because it wasn't necessary, and the special effects just look as bad as last time, and I just don't like any of the characters, as the acting by Chris Hemsworth and Jessica Chastain was terrible, and they don't have chemistry whatsoever. The plot is all over the place. It's a real mess, and it doesn't make any sense at times. And I was laughing at the corny dialogue, but it's not as laughable as Snow White and the Huntsman. While I was happy they never show Snow White throughout the film, as Kristen Stewart was, like I said last time, the worst Snow White. We'll see how Rachel Zegler does next time. And the action sequences were pretty dumb, as this is a completely silly movie, but not as bad as last time. I wouldn't recommend anybody watching the theatrical nor extended cut, as this movie is very bad, but it's better than the last time, for damn sure. But it doesn't say much. And this movie is sometimes painful to watch, and this is a solid non recommendation for this movie, as I wouldn't put director Cedric Nicholas Troyan in the director's chair for another fantasy movie ever again, as the dialogue was sometimes acted rather painfully, and at the end of the day, I can't stand this freaking movie like I can't stand Snow White and the Huntsman at all. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and next time I will be back with the 2025 live action Snow White film. And until then, mirror, mirror on the wall. I know it's not me that's the fairest of them all, but who's really fairest of them all? Let's find out next time.